Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of BB Time. I'm Nicolas Calderon from PI Medios and I'm here with Miguel Betancourt. Hi Miguel.
Hi Nico, how are you? How have you been? Today we're really excited because we're going to talk about a topic that fascinates us. We're going to discuss dark social in the BB world.
Great, before we dive in, let's hear the opinion of one of the crew members. Let's call Laura Gonzalez.
Hi, Nico and Miguel. Well, I'm delighted to be here. What does dark social marketing mean to me? That's a great question. To me, it's all those interactions that happen on channels that can't be tracked. In other words, it's that digital word of mouth or the content we share from person to person that ultimately drives traffic to websites, but we can't track it, we don't know where it comes from, and we can't easily attribute it. If this were a strategy, or if we think of it strategically, the truth is it's one of the most powerful because it not only generates interest but also builds trust. The traffic that comes from there already has a high level of interest and comes from trusting the person who recommended it to me, who talked about the topic. So I think it's extremely powerful, especially for this sector, which is B2B.
Thank you, Lau, for these words, Nico. I think this gives us a great introduction to the topic of dark social. What really stands out to me is what you mentioned. It's a place where we can't attribute, where we can't measure, right? Where it's hard to have access and control.
And that's key because it defines a place, a space that we can't measure, like dark energy that we theorize exists, but we can't measure it. And another thing is, why are we talking about this as marketers? It's because that's the place where today's B2B buyer is getting informed in order to make a B2B purchase.
And why is it important, Nico, for B2B marketers to talk about this topic? Did you know that 54% of web traffic comes from dark social? So if our comprehensive marketing strategy doesn't include specific tactics that are designed to address the world of dark social, then we really won't be able to effectively take advantage of this incredibly important space, this very valuable place where customers are communicating.
Yes, but I would also say there's something that makes it special. And it's that just like with inbound marketing years ago, we used to attract them, right? So they wouldn't feel like we were being annoying, like we were trying to sell them something. I think dark social is something beyond that where we can't even measure it, but it's worth taking that leap into the unknown because we won't be able to tell the finance team, look, this post on Quora brought us 3 clients. It's going to be very difficult.
All of this information that is shared through dark social is in reality a perfectly natural form of human behavior. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, a client of mine said, Miguel, I need a CRM that can help me with these functions. I shared a Salesforce video with him. He didn't know about it, started looking into it, and he liked it, especially the technology aspect. He thought it was great and went to the website, right? It's a normal, natural behavior, right? Between you and your clients or among colleagues, sharing information like this is just normal.
In fact, I have a statistic for you. 84% of consumers share via WhatsApp through what we would call dark channels with family and friends.
Exactly.
So I think that's what you're talking about.
Yes, of course. So 84% are sharing through this channel. How can we encourage this? How can you work on it? How can we take advantage of it? And I think that's the work we need to focus on. Now, clearly, dark social is part of a demand generation strategy. In other words, it's the place where we want people to share our demand generation content.
All right, Miguel, so I would define it like this. Dark social then is essentially the digital space where crucial interactions happen that we as marketers cannot easily see, create, or attribute to our campaigns. And it's within this very space that our modern B2B buyer is now educating themselves, gathering information, and forming opinions as they move through a buying process.
Perfect, Nico. I don't think you could have said it any better.
Excellent. So let's move on to the next section. Miguel, I want to share a story with you. I don't know if you know Slack, maybe you've heard of it.
Like, yes, no, just kidding. Obviously, Slack is very well known.
Well, it's quite remarkable that Slack initiated its business-to-business strategy entirely without relying on any form of traditional advertising. Essentially, the company became widely recognized as a primary platform where software developers, particularly in San Francisco and the broader Bay Area, began to organically form and cultivate vibrant development communities. These were centered around emerging startups, innovative new technologies, shared libraries, and other such topics that are highly specific to programmers. From there, word-of-mouth recommendations began to spread rapidly among the various developer teams within these communities, reaching a critical point where, as you are likely aware, it is now quite difficult to find a modern company that isn't utilizing Slack for its daily operations.
Basically, I create a status, I create within a niche so that if I'm a startup and I don't have Slack, I'm out.
Yeah. So how do they do it? No guidelines, no fences, and it's really smart? And how much is Slack worth today?
And how much did you invest to create that strategy? No.
I really think that's where it's good. I don't know how much they spent, how the strategy came about. We'd have to look into it more.
I used to think that maybe having a lot of these lunches was the primary way to position themselves among the top CEOs of major companies. I find this tool very interesting because in the end, dark social is a space we need to take advantage of, that we need to work in our favor so that those conversations happen organically within the natural behavior of human beings. And I think this example is great.
And here I think it's good to clarify that it's one thing for the space to exist. As you said, it's human nature. Of course, for me, it's natural to send a message to my mom or to a friend who asks me for a
recommendation
on WhatsApp, right? Because that's the most normal thing. But there's a strategy that I feel is this dark social tactic where we try to insert ourselves into that conversation as a company, but without it being obvious that it's just another marketing strategy, because today the B2B buyer no longer wants to enter those funnels we marketers invented because they already know that if they download that ebook, we're going to start calling them afterwards.
That click is going to take me to a landing page, and that landing page has a form to fill out. So what we're doing is trying through content, positioning, and the way those guys at Slack did it to get people to start interacting organically and eventually end up buying.
And that's a trend among B2B buyers. Today, if B2B buyers could, they would do everything self-service. And I think that tells us a lot about how our buyers are trying to escape from our funnels or super innovative marketing strategies. All right, Miguel, so to wrap up, because I feel like there's a lesson here.
This company, Slack, created a word-of-mouth strategy that wasn't easy to measure. What SEO would have come up with, or rather accepted this, where the marketing person said, I have a strategy where we won't be able to measure it. Let's just spread the word. Let's create a status for our platform so that everyone starts talking about it, even if we don't know how we're going to see it or how we're going to.
And look, I have another similar example that just came to mind. Reddit. When Reddit started, this forum network, the founders themselves began writing a lot of posts to give the platform its vibe. So what that tells me is, it might be a simple idea, even a silly one, but it can be very powerful for your company. So just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean we have to do it too. We can think outside the box, and an idea costs nothing. It could end up being the idea of the year. That's what these stories teach me.
Excellent. There is no single perfect strategy and no universally validated strategy that works for everyone. Ultimately, it all depends on your brand's unique identity and on the specifics of your buyer persona. So you have to create a genuinely out-of-the-box strategy that really knocks it out of the park and delivers exceptional results.
And why dark? Because that's where our B2B buyer is educating themselves today.
They are sharing
information. Where have we led them to hide from our funnels?
All right, let's move on to the next section. Nico,
let's go.
All right, myths, Nicholas, true or false? I'm bringing up this myth. I had a meeting with a client where we suggested doing some demand generation work and told them it was to strengthen dark social, to encourage dark social. And the client said to me, but isn't this something negative and a bit unethical? That's something that maybe, well, what do I think? It's because of the word dark, the darkness. People might get that connotation. Maybe they associate it with something because of the
bad things, black hat SEO strategies, like it's something kind of something
like forbidden. Exactly. So false or true?
False. I relate it more to the concept of dark energy. Yeah. That it's something dark, unknown, that can't be measured. And I feel like that's where it comes from. And you could also think it's something manipulative, wanting to influence that organic space. But well, that's how we marketers are. And we're always chasing the trend of where's the buzz?
I relate it to the dark side of the moon. Yeah. That it's dark and not easily seen, and humans haven't reached it yet. Kind of like that, it's hard to access. So I think that's where the topic of dark social comes in. But it's not that it's an unethical issue or something negative or a hacker thing. Well, I also think that because it's new,
we're revenue hackers. Maybe
people might start to confuse this term because it's new, but anyway, totally. And maybe it's not
the best name, like many things, not just in marketing.
Nico, our second myth is, maybe we've already touched on this a bit, but that dark social is impossible to measure or track. We've actually already been talking about this quite a bit because in a very fundamental way, the concept of dark social is associated with a digital space that simply can't be measured and as a result can't be properly analyzed.
Attributed. But then I would add to that by saying, well, maybe not immediately in the short term, but I do think it can be measured after the client has started a relationship. Or what do you think?
Yes, we talked about this in a previous podcast. We mentioned that there are ways to measure, for example, the traffic coming from a podcast and demand generation initiatives that are difficult to measure. Here we're talking about dark social, for example, someone who comes from a podcast, someone who comes from a webinar. Well, a webinar is a bit easier to measure.
There's a lot.
Someone who comes from a blog, right? How can we measure that? And we talked about it in the previous podcast. Fundamentally, we can measure this impact by directly asking our potential customers how they found out about us. We can do this either through a field on our contact forms or by having our sales team ask during their first contact call. We'd give them a clear list of options to choose from. For example, did you hear about us through our podcast, a Google campaign, or something else? By consistently collecting this self-reported data, we can then properly attribute and measure the performance of all these important but otherwise invisible dark social tactics.
Yes, it's happened to me that a lot of leads come in saying, oh, I saw this content on YouTube, or I already know you from what you post on LinkedIn. And there's a huge difference when you meet with someone who found you through your podcast, YouTube, or LinkedIn content compared to meeting with someone who maybe came in through a cold ad. The person's attitude is completely different because with the former, you literally feel like a celebrity. They're like, thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy. On the other hand, when you're with a lead that came in through an ad, it's like they're just waiting to see what you're going to sell them, right? It's almost like you're begging them, thanking them for giving you their valuable time. So the relationship gets flipped, and I think that's a really crucial point that we need to talk about here in the Dark Souls episode.
Well, I find what you just said really interesting. I mean, when there's a top voice or a brand ambassador, the dynamic in the first sales meeting is completely different because I already know you, I've already seen you, I already know what your personality is like.
I already want to do business.
They want to do business directly with you, so it naturally establishes a much closer working relationship from the start. And a significant part of that can be attributed to the simple fact that if this potential client is speaking to me with such a high degree of confidence, it's almost certainly because they've already spent a good amount of time consuming my content, they're actively following me online, and they feel like they already know me, right? Well, this topic is really cool.
Absolutely.
This third myth is related to the relevance that dark social has in a marketing strategy for a business-to-business company. So, is it relevant or not?
What do you think?
Well, if you ask me like that, I think it's super relevant. What I feel makes people or business owners think it's not relevant is the lack of understanding of the term.
That takes time, right? I think that's the main issue.
And
since we can't easily say that the podcast brought in 4 clients, it's not easy unless you ask everyone if they know about the podcast. Because in attribution, it might say that it was a lead generated because of, say, an ad on a landing page. But in reality, that person got to that ad or that search because they were inspired by everything that had happened in the demand generation phase.
But think about this, Nico. If you do good research, right? If I, after conducting some interviews with clients, find out that they really do listen to podcasts and that a certain type of content is relevant to them, then why wouldn't I make a podcast? I mean, I would already have the argument after a survey or obviously some important data gathered during the research to be able to say, let's talk about this specific topic on the podcast. And that way, I can mitigate the risk, let's say, of the podcast or this demand generation strategy not performing well. In the end, I can say, yes, it's relevant. It's very relevant because that's exactly what my audience needs.
And look, I wanted to give an example here. Take Slack, for instance. Was it relevant for Slack to develop that word-of-mouth strategy with developers? Well, now that we're in Slack's future, we know the answer is yes. But let's say they could have raised more money and run a super creative ad campaign, right? That could have worked for them, sure. But what I'm saying is, there are opportunities your competitors aren't taking advantage of. And that's where I feel the whole David and Goliath thing comes in. I mean, if your biggest competitor is, say, IBM isn't working on dark social. They're not going out and writing on blogs or forums because they already have that almost by default. But they don't control those conversations or build loyalty with their users there. It's more like the community knows. But if you're a small player in this world of giants and you do what no one else is doing because it's tedious to go find the blog, write about topics, respond properly, But if you do what your competition isn't doing, you'll gain a competitive advantage. So gaining a competitive advantage might be relevant or not. It really depends on each case.
But I think what makes it truly relevant, Nico, is when there's good, solid research behind it, and we can confidently say, this is precisely what my audience needs, which is a strategy Slack most likely employed. I really don't think Slack did it randomly or just decided to try something out for the sake of it. I firmly believe there was extensive research involved that allowed them to realize that developers needed a dedicated space to build that community, and they took full advantage of that market gap, just as you said, to launch a very strong and effective campaign.
Although what you call research, I think that's from our perspective as an agency, right? Because we have to do research and immerse ourselves in each client's world. But in the end, what is that research? I mean, they already knew what developers talk about. So you have to look, so to speak, within each company. That's where that special point is that can set us apart in the market. And that's what we're looking for with that research.
But a marketing agency is the one in charge of taking that insight, which the client might already have very clear, and developing it in a strategic way.
Yes, I agree, of course.
Or they can't answer themselves, what do? We know there's this need, there's this insight, but the marketing agency is the one that
helps bring that to light. Of course, to reveal what already exists in words and in a concept. All right, well, that one was a bit long, but I like that myth. All right, Miguel. Well, BB time, it's your turn today, right?
Yes, it's my turn today. So you have 30 seconds to answer a question that our audience has asked us. Today we don't have our lottery machine, so we're going to ask the production team to give us a number.
All right.
6. Okay, number 6. What advice would you give to B2B companies that want to start exploring dark social?
All right, the first thing is to be very clear about your research, the research on your buyer persona and the buying committee, and to know where they are, whether they're educating themselves and understanding their needs, or later on in the buying process.
Okay, where they are and what they want to hear.
Yes.
Or what they want to want.
Yes, I mean, it could be a podcast, it could be LinkedIn, Twitter, Substack, depending
on to your
part.
To encourage that sharing of information within dark social. All right, give me another number, please. 3. All right, 3. How can we encourage our employees to share company content on their social networks?
Well, when you talk to me about social networks, I immediately think of LinkedIn, and it's a really tough challenge because basically companies just tell employees to post and that's it. But there should be a win-win between what the employee does and what they get out of it. And what?
Of course, because it's a win-win for both, for the company and the person, because the person is going to build a persona, a personal brand within LinkedIn, and the company will gain a brand ambassador to help foster, let's say, that network.
Well, Miggy, we've reached the end of another episode of BB Time, this time about dark social.
Well, I truly hope that with this episode, B2B marketers will gain a deeper understanding of the importance of generating demand and effectively taking advantage of this often untapped dark social space.
So how do we wrap up this episode? Well, I think we should get to the root of why this is becoming relevant, because it's really nothing new.
Basically, Nico, it's because the B2B buyer behaves very differently from what we might imagine. They want to self-manage all the time. They don't want us to force them onto a website. They don't want to join a webinar at 3 p.m. on a Friday because that's just not when they want to do it. So we have a webinar where 10 people join live, we leave it recorded, and they watch it whenever they want. That doesn't mean that watching the webinar at 3 a.m. is wrong. It just means they're managing everything on their own terms. So what's important here? First of all, we really need to understand that today's buyer already has a very, how can I best describe it, a substantially more independent and autonomous behavior. But what are the primary reasons for this development?
I think it's because they got tired of downloading an ebook that looked interesting, only to then get bombarded with calls trying to sell them something they're not ready for. So I think that we, as marketers, have actually pushed users towards self-management. But that's what I wanted to tell you that...
That's exactly what I wanted to say, because maybe it's not that the buyer has evolved, but rather that marketing has led people to have content available to them at any time, making them think, I have to do it the way they tell me. And then they make it more authentic and natural.
Yes, I think so. And something that adds even more value to these interactions is when they're not, like, I'm not telling you, hey, I'm the best, but rather someone else is telling you that I'm the best. Do you trust that more?
Of course, because it's like we discussed in the example, someone shared certain information with me on WhatsApp, or someone shared it with me on Slack, and they're validating it for me.
Yes, I think what we want to achieve is that word of mouth effect, which is like the holy grail for marketers these days. And this is what creates that halo effect for us, where many people who have gotten to know the people behind the brand, whether through the podcast, on Medium, or on the blog, by the time they start a buying process, they're already fans.
They already come in with more interest, they're more informed. And on top of that, if we have a spokesperson, we talked about this earlier, or a brand ambassador, people are going to feel much more trust in that person or that company when it comes to closing the deal. In other words, the conversion rate is much higher.
And that's why it's worth talking to our finance team, to our CEOs, and telling them that even though we can't directly attribute a certain number of leads to a particular tactic, that doesn't mean we should stop doing certain tactics just because there's no way to attribute them. I believe that the job of marketing today is to deliver sales results, and that's what will keep both the finance team and the CEO happy.
Okay, that sounds excellent to me.
As always, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions, good or bad, we welcome them all. Personally, I love debate, so not all of us think the same way. The idea is that we build something together.
And I want to say something. I think this topic isn't set in stone, right? I've come across a lot of information during the long time we've been working on this topic. Some people say one thing, others say something else, and I don't think it's about someone having the truth or not. There are some very purist concepts from certain people, but I don't think we can talk about something so purist when the subject is so new. I believe there are some truths, there is certain information we all agree on, but I also think that's what it's about. Debating, but not creating absolute truths that might bias us early on in this topic of dark social, in this topic of demand generation.
Yes, I think so. But we do need to strike a balance so that when we talk among marketers, we all understand that we're talking about the same thing and also realize that this is still being written. I think for me, my OCM razor is results. Call it whatever you want, name it however you like, but is it working or not?
And I think that's the most important thing for us, and maybe that's why we decided to do the podcast. Because even though there are concepts still being developed, our results can validate us. Let's say the information we're sharing makes a lot of sense because it's based on the experience we've gained from working with companies.
Absolutely. Well, that's the end of our podcast. As you know, questions, comments, suggestions, leave them here on Spotify, on YouTube, or on whatever channel you're watching us. We hope to read your messages very soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.